Francisco, and I'm reading what the mayor wants to do over there. She wants to tear down the site of the Westfield Mall. She wants to just tear it all down, tear down the city. My question is, don't you think you've done a good enough job tearing down the city? Mayor Lyndon Breed? My goodness. And when you tear down the Westfield Mall, I mean, they're abandoning it, but now people are trying to figure out, well, what's next? I don't know what's next if you're going to tear down the city or tear down the mall. So, I have been thinking about this for a while. Maybe it's time to move back to the city and run for mayor. I don't know, just an idea, because when I was in high school, I was mayor for a day. That's all it took. It took me one day, and I went in, and everything ran on time. The Giants won. Was able to issue a proclamation to my girlfriend. Oh, it was an imaginary one. But it got done. I'm just saying, I'm just a little upset that I was reading this. I don't know if that's the way. I don't even know the direction the city is going in with the office space situation, and we haven't even touched homelessness and all that. But I do know this. Come August, I'm bringing my show Emil, Amok, lost NPR host, found in San Francisco. I'm bringing it to 277 Taylor Street. There's a theater there. Don't let the homeless tents fool you. There is a theater there, and August 12th, I'll be doing a show there. Also, August, let's see, what are the dates here? I have to, August 12th, 7 p.m., that's a Saturday. Thursday, August 17th, 8:30 p.m., and Saturday the 19th at 1 p.m. at 277 Taylor. It's where the Exit Theater is, San Francisco Fringe Festival. Emil Amok, lost NPR host. Maybe by then I'll have a solution to San Francisco's problems. Because look, I'm a native son. I have some good. I'll think about it. I'll think about a solution. But you can't tear down. You can the Westfield Mall can go away, but you can put something else in there. Or maybe someone can use that space. Do you have to tear it down? I've been through some tear downs in the city. You think it's hard to come back, when you have, homeless situation and I don't know, you're talking about massive projects there in downtown San Francisco. The mayor was talking about maybe a soccer stadium. I don't know. A soccer stadium? Oh, San Francisco. I'm a native son. That's why I care. I care about this stuff. Anyway, welcome to Emil Amok's Takeout. My takes on all things considerable. We're here Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific or thereabouts. We talk about the news. Of course, everyone's talking about the Titan. As I said yesterday, I've tried to avoid the Titan, tried to avoid talking about it until yesterday because I was just silent prayer, right? Wasn't into the possibility. I mean, it was a way to get you to keep watching. Are they going to find them? They're running out of air. I didn't want to get disappointed. So I was in silent prayer, and then the disappointment, the sadness yesterday when they found the debris. So I'm going to bring up Professor Daniel Phil Gonzalez because he can talk about that. He has a JD. He can talk about the liability of Ocean's Gate, the company, because I guess they should have known that there was going to be some issues there. The progressive damage to the hull, they should have been more aware. And no matter how many waivers you sign, they're there probably still is some liability involved there. I mean, especially since you have tycoons who were lost. And certainly they knew the risks, but I'm sure they're lawyering up, or their heirs are lawyering up now. So we'll talk about the Titan. Got to talk about the Titan. I want to talk about Vincent Chin. I mean, because this is Vincent Chin plus 5. If you're talking about Vincent Chin 41 years after the most famous hate crime to impact Asian America. And most people are talking about it today because today is the day they pulled the plug and Vincent Chin officially died at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. Talking specifically about June 23rd, 1982. But the initial event, when he was clubbed into a coma by Ronald Ebens, that took place June 19th, 1982. So this would be June 19th, the 20th, the 21st, 22nd, the 23rd. This is the fifth day. The fifth day that Vincent Chin was in a coma, or the fifth day of the event that placed him in a coma. And then on the 23rd, they ended life support and he died. So we've been talking about it all week. This is day 5. I'm going to bring up Dan to talk about that because Dan is the Professor Emeritus Asian American Studies, College of Ethnic Studies, San Francisco State University. Just talk about what that means. And then in terms of, other Asian American news that's important, I want to talk about that state dinner with Prime Minister Modi and just the dance, the diplomatic dance of Biden. He was in California earlier this week, called President Xi of China a dictator. Certainly that came up, as well as issues of Modi having his visa taken away in 2005 when he tried to enter the United States, and questions of Modi's human rights record. And now we're dancing with him. I think it sounds like Ferdinand Marcos a little bit. I'm going to ask Dan about that. And then, of course, I'm going to ask Dan about the Supreme Court decision. We've been waiting for the affirmative action case to be heard, or to be the opinion to be unveiled by the court. They could have let it out at the beginning of the month, but each week it's been like is it this week? Is it this week? Today they brought out a decision about immigration, so they did not come out with a decision on affirmative action this week, but next week is the last week before the summer recess. And so I'll talk to Dan, of course, about that case, because that's the big one that Asian Americans are interested in. The Asian Americans who believe in affirmative action and want to see it upheld, and then the Asian Americans who feel that they were discriminated against when they applied to Harvard and they want affirmative action done away with. They're being used. We've talked about that, but we will mull over the topic this hour. We're going to try to keep it short. It's a Friday show. So let me bring up Professor Daniel Phil Gonzalez, College of Ethnic Studies. My friend, how are you, Dan?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me again. And yes, happy Friday afternoon.
Yeah, well, let's first talk about the story that's in the news, because it's everyone's talking about it now, the Titan. I tried to avoid watching the Titan early on because I thought, well, I don't want to be led into this disappointment. Let me just see if I'll cross my fingers and pray and hope they find them. And then, of course, they didn't. So I guess the question now is everyone is wondering why they had to do it. And if, by signing a waiver, if that excuses the company Ocean's Gate from any kind of liability, or what do you think is going to happen now? I mean, they can't find. Apparently, the catastrophic implosion was such that the bodies are all, who knows?
They're compressed.
Yeah,
They're absolutely compressed. They're more than 2 miles down, right? So
yeah,
they're anyway. Yeah, you're right about limitations on waivers. Waivers, or also known technically as exculpatory clauses, have a limited effect. In this instance, however, uh, it might have an almost absolute protection for the company, and the reason is it's so clearly dangerous. It's so clearly dangerous, and so it all comes down to what is reasonable, right? Did they have a reasonable expectation that they would die, or that they could die? And then on the other hand, were there reasonable precautions taken to avoid the possibility of a catastrophic, occurrence?
right.
And
This
that
would be a civil case of negligence,
yes,
right?
yes.
This would not
Well, yeah,
be.
you could do that. Yes.
I mean, it's not going to be a criminal necessarily a criminal case, although that would be complicated considering all the different.
No, you always yeah. Criminal cases are always about intent, right? And
So
yeah, and so you could be criminally negligent, okay, because you were so absolutely or nearly absolutely careless,
yeah.
about safety issues, and all of the reports that I've been hearing are that the owner was a safety nut.
Well, yes and no. I've heard things like that too, but also things to the contrary, suggesting that maybe they cut some corners by going to that carbon fiber material. Maybe they didn't.
Well, he
Didn't
did. He did repeated dives though with that material.
right up to I think there was something like 20 dives and
Yeah.
or more than 20 dives, and there's this idea of progressive damage that just because you do 20 dives, you think, oh, well, this is the test, right? It works. But no, this is the test that there's a diminishing of its capacity the more
Right.
you do it. So
Right.
you can see
Well,
a
you
lawyer
know,
can argue.
for me, it comes down to I think you're right that the company could still be liable simply because of the way the thing was designed. So even though people, uh, the reason I brought up the number of trips, and you mentioned 20 previous trips,
Yeah,
is to point at the possibility that there was fatigue in some of the materials. And one of the problems with its design was that it was using carbon fiber,
right.
okay, and instead of metal, straight up metal. And even though the carbon fiber, let's presume that it was strong enough to hold up under the pressure. When you're using dissimilar materials, it's where the interface of metal with carbon fiber, that's where the weaknesses are. Okay, so the front cap with the porthole in it, right, was titanium and other metal, and there's also titanium framing and side panels. Okay,
So when they uh, went head to head or faced when they were connected with the carbon fiber, that sort
yeah,
of
the place where obviously you're going to have to use seals, or you're going to have an overlapping connection, and the way to do that is that you use some kind of connective material to essentially glue the carbon fiber, because you can't use heat, you can't weld it to the metal parts. You
And
know,
so the speculation is that because of the pressure was too much.
especially after repeated dives.
Yeah.
So it's just like airplanes, right? The wings, particularly where the wings attach to the fuselage, start to show fatigue,
Yeah.
and
Well,
and they especially on older planes, right? And so
it's
the same thing is true of any submersible. It's going to have the same kind of problems.
it's a kind of wear and tear. Sort of
Yes,
imagine a tire against the road.
yes,
You
and
know.
that's where the liability might come, because
Yeah.
he uh, they didn't.
You're talking about the
Assuming the risk, right? They didn't assume the risk of poor maintenance.
yeah, but when you're talking about the passengers.
Yes,
Yeah. Even though they signed these documents,
yes, yeah.
uh,
That's how we
prior,
started the conversation, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
documents that say death every other word. That that death is. I
yeah.
mean,
It's
it's enough to
possible.
say they knew that death was possible.
Yeah,
I'm
well, that's it right there. Possible rather than probable, right? So you're signing up, and you there's still a. It's not a total, right?
Yeah,
Uh, Risk, where you absolutely accept the fact that you're going to die. You're going to die, right?
yeah. Well, this is gonna. I mean, it's gonna take a long time. I mean, we mourn the five passengers, but like if you're going out, I mean, this also says something about regular people, and these weren't regular people. These were
Well,
adventurers with a lot of money.
unfortunately, one of the passenger's sons
Right.
was also killed, and he's more a regular person, and he
Well,
didn't want to. He really didn't want to go.
oh well, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I just know that. Okay, you're right. The adults, the millionaires in who were passengers,
yeah,
most of them were well-to-do, either adventurers, dyed-in-the-wool adventurers, and one, the Pakistani man who brought his son. Maybe I didn't hear that his 19-year-old son didn't want to go. Uh,
yeah. That's what
but
his mother did a couple of interviews, and she said, yeah, he didn't want to go, but he felt obligated because it was Father's Day,
yeah, to please dad.
and yeah, and it was an opportunity to bond with his dad, and that became a reality in the worst way possible.
Boy, I did not hear that story. 'Cause like I said, I've tried to stay away from as much of this story, except for the fact that yep, they found it. Yep, here's the debris.
Oh
Here's
yeah, as soon as they said there was something that appeared, debris, and it was within. At first, they didn't tell you how close it was to the Titanic. Okay,
yeah,
but as soon as they said that within the area they were searching, there was a debris field, I said, that's it. The thing imploded.
yeah.
Um,
It's sad, but this is something. I forget. I'm sorry about the hearing about the son, but the father, the guy Hamish Harding, the French explorer, Stockton Rush, the owner of the company. These guys were hardened. You know,
yeah, yeah.
they knew what they were getting into, and even the French adventurer said, "Hey, look, I'd rather die, you know, it, being submerged and slowly losing consciousness. Not a bad way to die." I mean, that's the way he put it in a recording, you know, prior
Yeah,
to
well, that's when you run out of oxygen. But
right. But I mean, but now you had that, and then the whole thing imploded, and now
right.
you got blown up to bits.
Yeah,
So
it was quick. It
yeah,
was,
but
you know,
they didn't. The idea, I've heard this in a number of reports. Oh, they felt no suffering. They felt no. They did
yeah,
not.
that's what most people think.
Well,
I think, yeah, but what if in an instant, the instant that it imploded, there was a slight leak, or there was a notable crack,
Yeah.
right? So you can't tell me that there was no suffering, right? Because the psychological, the fear, it only takes a split second,
Yeah.
right,
And
to experience that.
and really, I mean, it's almost irrelevant. Dead is dead. I hate to. I mean, the fact that they had experienced suffering or not, I was surprised when people said that. Like, oh, it was quick. Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
they're gone. I mean,
yeah.
it's and maybe they shouldn't have gone down there. Maybe there should have been some kind of federal or some kind of, whoever is in charge of,
Basic
overseeing.
regulations. Well, there are some basic regulations, but the owner himself
Yeah.
came out and several times said, I've done things against the book,
Right.
and I know I'm taking a risk, but it's a very well founded, well engineered risk, that kind of thing.
Yeah. He cut a corner, and
Yeah, he didn't see it that way. He
yeah.
just saw
Right.
himself as doing something off the book. It was off the edge of the book.
Well, it was
But
also to justify his what his desire for
yeah,
that kind of danger. That kind of. I mean, there are risk takers. I
right.
who I've never bungee jumped. I know that there are people, out in the audience probably have and said, "Oh, Emil, what's bungee?" I mean, bungee jumping isn't even as serious as going down to see the Titanic. But in that spectrum, I even have stopped riding roller coasters. That's how much I just I'm become more risk averse. I
Right.
don't mind opening up a microphone on the internet and saying anything I want, but I draw the line at roller coasters.
Despite the fact that there are people that might hate us out there and that they're well armed.
Oh yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's called living in America. So,
Yeah.
well, but all right. So here's my point. The last point about the the Titan, and that is there are people, there are weekend warriors out there. Should they be more cautious about things? I mean, there are people doing things that they shouldn't be doing. We got to
Yeah,
look.
sure they should. But look at all the people that show up at those stupid what do they call those things that the people doing circles in the middle of an intersection or on the Bay Bridge and
Oh, you mean the dumb?
sideshow,
That's right.
dumbass sideshows.
Yeah,
And it's not so much the people who are driving the cars and hanging out of them and all that.
yeah,
It's the pedestrians. It's the people who are standing by on the side.
right. They
You
can
could
be
you could
harmed.
get dead very easily. You could
Yeah.
get dead very easily, especially when they start doing two cars, on the same circle at the same time, right?
I think that's kind of a demographic thing. I mean, where like I don't know if would you see people in our demographic? Is it a like a 50 plus kind of thing? It's more like an 18 to
Sure, it's
35.
younger people. Yeah, I would agree with that.
And if it's in something, if people like us getting, it's accidental. We just happen to be driving by and there it was. Oh, they're doing a
Right,
slideshow. I don't know.
right.
I just think that
I know. There's some guys in my age group among my
right.
cohort that I think might do a sideshow.
Yeah, yeah.
But they're very rare. But
Well,
but
well,
they have that what gets referred to as toxic masculinity. They have
oh yeah,
they
yeah.
have this streak of dare, right?
This,
Uh,
this,
and antagonism towards the traditional order of things and the law, right?
yeah,
And they want to dare it. And I've seen those guys act the same way when we were younger,
yeah,
and sometimes it cost them their car.
yeah, yeah.
They were going too fast. They were lucky enough that they didn't get killed or hurt, but they screwed up the car bad enough so that it was a total.
Well, you're right
Uh,
about the streak of dare, and sometimes people feel like, hey, I'm doing this because it makes me feel alive, and but
yeah, that's the irony, isn't it?
literally
They're
it can
risking
kill.
that. Yeah,
And so, I mean, I saw someone who I kind of knew in college. Yeah, he was actually younger than me, but I saw him interviewed saying that he went down on the Titan, and
right.
he's also fairly wealthy. So,
Well, it's
he,
250 grand a pop, right?
yeah,
For a
he
seat.
he could afford it, This is a guy who wrote for The Simpsons, and he said, "Yeah, I just signed it. It had death, about 8 or 9 times, and I just signed it away." And you just, I don't know. If I saw a document like that, I don't think I would make sure that I had a lot of life insurance.
Well, but usually insurers, you know, it's hard as hell if you're a race car driver to get any kind of life
Well,
insurance.
from Lloyd's of
So
London or something like that.
it's a naturally dangerous activity, right? So they ask you that when you buy the policy.
Yeah,
Do you
just
engage
for
in the naturally dangerous
just a
activity,
regular
right?
guy like me, like just say, oh, well, this week
Yeah,
I'm going to go down on the Titan. Uh,
right.
double up. I'd say, oh, let me buy another, couple million or something. Because
Yeah,
anyway, it's sad. And we people are mourning now, and it's all over the news. But we're going to hear about this for a long time to come.
yeah. They're going to be carrying in their scientific
Yeah.
investigation. And the thing that cracked me up as a reporter is, well, it's not exactly funny,
What's that?
but the reporter's behavior was funny. They were asking, is there any chance of recovering the bodies?
Mm.
And I said, why don't you go Google what 80,000 pounds per square inch will do?
What will it do? I mean, I can't even imagine.
You know, I mean, even if their physical body stayed attached, all of the parts stayed attached and stuff like that, they would be compressed beyond recognition except for the bones.
Yeah.
You know.
So this is, you know, I'm sad. I'm sad to hear that detail you brought out about the 19-year-old kid. I did not hear that.
Yeah, well, that was the saddest part too. I mean, I agree, but it it kind of shows you what kind of attitude the dad had, right? I mean, you want to risk your ass, that's fine,
And
but
then look, and then the kid is thinking like, I got a bond with my dad. Look,
yeah,
the
that's
most
right.
courageous thing I had to do with my dad was sit next to him at a baseball game.
Well, it depends on where you're sitting. Those foul liners, man,
Like,
that's
I
dangerous.
know, but so like I can see why the kid wanted to be with his father.
It was Father's
Yeah.
Day,
Yes.
and that's
Well, all right. Look,
we spent too long on
yeah.
that. Let's
Let's
move
move
on.
on. Look, let's talk about another sad and somber thing. Well, we are going to talk about Vincent Chin, 41 years since the Vincent Chin murder, or when he.
Well, the current generation doesn't know much about it, and you wouldn't expect the general population to reflect on it.
No, no, and
And but then the question is, how much of the Asian American community reflects on it?
well, I don't think very many, and this is what makes me think that. I was picked up the New York Times as I am wont to do, and there is a on the front page
Uh huh.
underneath the big picture of Modi talking to Congress, um, which we can talk to a little later. But the headline is North Korean defector finds audience on right, and it's about this 28-year-old woman who talks about the first thing my mom taught me as a young girl living in North Korea was don't even whisper because birds and mice could hear me. Yeonmi Park told the audience that had come to hear her speak in Queens. This is what dictators do. They plant a spike everywhere, a disastrous, um, a distrust between people, a distrust between family, even. The teachers tell their children, she went on. If your parents say one wrong thing, come to tell the teacher. This is a North Korean defector, and she's here in Queens, and she says, and now I see this same sort of thing in America. And this is the kind of Asian American or Asian in America whom the conservatives just love. They eat this up. And, the nut graph here in the Time story, conservative pundits and politicians have long warned that liberal economics and cultural politics would, let's see, would set the United States on the road to leftist authoritarianism. But until
Not that again.
yeah, but until 2 years ago, they had never they had never had an ally quite like Ms. Park, this young May Park. And like I said, she's like 28, 29, and she is now the darling of the right, talking about communism, the darling of conservatism, and this is the new Asian American, right? The Asian American who comes here, say they come, they come here, say between even the 2000s to today. They could be anywhere from age 15 to 35. It's a broad demographic. But you get someone like this, Yenmi Park, coming in talking like this, the conservatives glom onto her, and you see how she this is the new Asian American, conservative, immigrant. And when you say something like Vincent Chin, it's almost like you might as well be talking about Wong Kim Ark or something. The Chinese American
Yeah, something out of the 19th century.
19th century who established in the 14th Amendment, uh, the idea of you know you know
Birth birthright. You were born in the country. You have
right,
citizenship. Yeah,
and which is something that the right is trying to undo. You know,
sure.
but I'm just pointing out that Vincent Chin, who died in 1982, 41 years ago, that may as well be ancient history for some of these folks who just have come to America, have come here being, anti, well, she's coming in denouncing the North Koreans, but instead of embracing America as being land of the free, she attacks leftists. She's used by the right. She's used by the conservatives to attack liberals, Democrats in particular, and this is why we need history lessons, right?
Yeah, and not just history. You got to look at it as social conflict and political conflict. And
Yeah,
they that's the problem when we learn this stuff, even in our basic history courses, right? In middle school and high school and even in college. All they do is hit the basic facts, and
they
there's
don't
not,
have
there's
time.
not much analysis,
Yeah,
And so a guy was killed. It seems like it was unfair because people hunted him down and hit him with a baseball bat. So they were armed. He was not, and the details, such that neither of the defendants had to serve hard time. Right? They
no,
got credit for time served while awaiting trial, and then they were saddled with a fine that they could pay off in installments.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And then
Before you get into that, because I will go over the facts, but I just wanted I bring up this Park woman because this is representative of the new Asian America. I think.
yeah, I think as far as I think that's true, and it's truer for immigrants than it is for domestic born, right? However, the time that has gone by, and so this event is not something that people would be exposed to, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Anywhere in the formal educational system, they would be exposed to it in my class.
yeah.
But
I mean,
I'm retired, and I don't know if the younger ones who took over after me talk about the Vincent Chin case.
see, this is the thing. No one talks about Vincent Chin. No one knows about it. And that's why I take it upon myself every year to talk about it and not just talk about it on the day that people decide, oh, we're going to talk about it on June 23rd because that's when Vincent Chin died. No, I talk about it on June 19th when Vincent Chin was clubbed into a coma by Ronald Ebens. And so, here are the facts. June 19th, 1982, Vincent Chin was just 27. He was with friends at his own bachelor party. He was mistaken for being Japanese by two white auto workers, Ronald Ebens and Ebens' stepson, Michael Nitz, at a Detroit strip club. It was a bachelor party, right? Ebens told me, Emil Guillermo, because I talked to Ebens. He said Chin sucker punched him, and the fight
There it
was
is.
taken outside. The fight was taken outside, and then it was broken up. And Ebens didn't like the odds. Chin said, "You want to keep going?" And Ebens realized he was outmanned. Five friends of Chin's to two, Ebens and Nitz, and Ebens says that it should have ended there, but no. Nitz went to get a baseball bat, and when Chin and his friends left, Nitz and Ebens pursued Chin in the car, hunting them down from where they were in Detroit to Highland Park, where the McDonald's was. And there they saw him in a parking lot, and Ebens then took out the baseball bat and brutally beat Chin with that baseball bat, with Michael Nitz standing behind Ronald Ebens.
Should have been first degree murder. Was
Yeah,
That was my position? Was there was enough cooling time? There's not only cooling time, there's cooling space. The action moved right from one place to another. So he should have been charged with first degree murder, and you might have been able to get a second degree murder uh, conviction.
yeah. So
But
they should have gone right to the top.
I think that that's supportable.
Well, see,
But
yeah,
prosecution didn't even show up for one hearing for the first hearing. I couldn't believe that.
yeah. So let me go on with more of the facts. Chin was comatose for 4 days, pronounced dead on June 23rd. And that's why, for most people, they hear about or they talk about, if they talk about Chin's case at all, they take it from the 23rd. But I think it's worth going over from the 19th to while Vincent Chin has been in a coma to see
Right.
what was going on. What was happening was the community was getting a sense of a reality. This was like the smelling salts to make them aware and bring them to their social activism. Here's what Ebens and Nitz got for the crime, though. They were allowed, as you mentioned, to plea bargain. They pleaded guilty to second degree murder, were sentenced in a state court to 3 years probation, and fined $3,720. Now, usually when you say that to an audience, when you talk about Vincent Chin, that's when people lose it. They say, "What?"
Yep, that's right.
They say, "What are you talking? They got probation for
Yep,
murder."
they got credit for time served. They were held, pending trial, and they got credit for time served. So that means that while they were in prison being held for the beginning of the trial, they were getting credit towards whatever sentence they would get. Okay, and so that's why probation came about, because they had already spent time. The judge was able to take into consideration that they had already spent time in jail. Are you going to get to the part about the judge's comments on sentencing?
No, I'm not. I'm only going high. Will you tell me about that? I don't get into the judge's comments, but you go ahead.
Well, this is not a direct quote, but it is close. He said the punishment should fit the criminal, not only the crime.
So he's saying because Ebens and Nitz were white, they should
Yeah,
be
and
more
and and
lenient.
their motivation was out of anger that they were being displaced by the American penchant for cheaper Japanese cars. But what was going on was it was another period of high fuel costs, right?
Right.
And also, American cars were really bad. They cars were junk, man. Between '76 and '83 or '84, I mean, you could take it all the way up to '83, '84, '85. They were terrible, and
Yeah.
part of the reason was they were just, instead of looking at the engines the way the Japanese and the Germans did, and actually the Germans and the Europeans weren't, they were making junk too.
Yeah.
But
Well, the car thing. Look, I got it. The car thing was, but Ebens, to this day, when I asked him about this, he said no. It was never about cars. It was never about the guy's race. It was just about the the
the
argument.
confrontation,
Yeah.
yeah,
And the physical confrontation that forced the fight, the sucker punch, and I think Chin apparently, um, his his friends said that he threw a chair, it hit Nitz. It was he was aiming it, he was just throwing it. It ended
yeah.
up hitting Nitz, and then that's what caused the fight to go. And they brought it outside, and then that's when cooler heads prevailed outside. But instead of going,
But one of the witnesses at trial, it was one of the dancers in the club at trial, said uh, she she said, "Well, either Evans or Nitz said it's because of you yellow motherfuckers that we're out of a job."
yeah,
So whatever Evans said about it, it wasn't about race and it wasn't about cars. That statement would seem to fly in the face of that, of his argument.
true, true. I don't quote the stripper who was there who did. I know that that was an issue that people brought up. But like I said,
Yeah, pardon the quote, but I was quoting.
it was or is a quote. But I mean, this is the thing. Uh, people heard. I mean, there are other aspects of this case when you think about it. For example, well, this comes up later. What happened was the community was upset after
The
the
Asian American community was upset, but
yeah
the people that came out and showed them how to express their anger was the United Auto Workers, UAW,
yeah
right?
yeah
Because they had some African American leadership,
mm,
that was that had been through issues around race and the workplace and race and segregation, right?
right.
Detroit.
So it really was a coalition.
Yeah,
It,
it
it
was.
wasn't a coalition. The community had help from the UAW, and this may explain why Helen Zia, who is known more as a journalist subsequent to the Vincent Chin case, because she worked for Ms. Magazine, but fact is, she was also an auto worker, and
Right.
I didn't realize that until last year that
Right.
Helen,
I didn't know that at all.
yeah,
That
Helen
she was.
was an auto worker, and so the
She lives
community,
out here now, doesn't she? Does she live around the Bay Area?
yeah, well, part time. I think she travels a lot, but
Oh, okay.
um,
Yeah, because I see her a lot here in,
yeah,
San Francisco.
she lives in the Bay Area, but like I said, she travels a lot, and I know that that the uh, the case, the state case, led to this federal civil rights prosecution,
Right.
and that's
Which
where
succeeded initially.
right. Well,
Then defendants, attorneys asked for a change of venue
yeah.
and a new trial, and it was moved to Ohio.
Well, wait. We're getting ahead. Ebens was found guilty on one charge and sentenced to 25 years in prison. This is the initial
Right.
federal civil rights prosecution against Ebens and Nix. Now, what happened was Ebens appealed. He was found
Right.
guilty,
Right.
right? So he appealed to the Sixth Circuit. And then a second federal trial was moved from Detroit to Cincinnati.
That's right.
And then that's where Ebens was acquitted by a Cincinnati jury
That's right.
that found no racial motivation in the
So yeah, right, that's it right there. Now how now here we are, right? 40 years later,
41.
41, and my question is, how much has Ohio changed?
Yeah. Or Detroit for that matter.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Well,
actually,
Detroit, yeah,
there are a lot more Asians now in Detroit and Ohio than you think, but actually a lot more Hispanics in Ohio, a lot more in Michigan. The Asians primarily, you have a
well, I
large
know that there was a pro-Trump Republican Filipino Republican group
in.
in Ohio.
Oh
You know,
yeah, in Ohio they have. There was one Republican Filipino mayor.
that's right, and it was in that city that they had a strong Republican Filipino American Republican organization.
Yeah, and I talked to those Filipinos in Ohio from time to time, and they still are rabid Trumpers. They
Yes, they are.
still mention they
Yes,
must
they
be
are.
celebrating now that all this stuff is coming out about Hunter Biden, and
Yeah, right.
they don't even talk about the indictment of Trump, or they let the indictment of Trump roll off their back as if, oh, that's nothing. But anyway, let's get back to so the we have Ebens, who essentially is told by the Cincinnati jury he's acquitted, no racial motivation,
That's right.
and because it's you know there's no double jeopardy, there's there's no appeal, there can't be an appeal,
So there is double jeopardy, and that once it's decided,
right?
you know,
Right. There is
because it
because
was already an appeal, and so if there was an attempt to appeal from the district court, you know, it would have had to go forward to the U.S. Supreme Court, and that wasn't going to happen.
so this is what happened to Evans and Nitz, and here's the other thing, the Chin family
Then
then
one of them moved out here to the
Ebens
West Coast.
Ebens is in Las Vegas.
Okay.
He's in Nevada. And part of the, I'm getting to that. The Chin family was awarded $2 million in judgment in civil litigation against Ebens back in the 80s. And this is according to Helen Zia in an interview I did with her back in 2017. And she continues to monitor Ebens, who is now, I think he's in his mid 80s, like 83 now. He retired in Nevada, and the judgment's been continued, but she told me that not a dime was paid
Yep.
because of the favorable laws in Nevada that protects people who are bankrupt and and can show no assets. He is judgment proof. And so when I asked Helen about this, she said the guy did what he did. He's a killer. He got away with murder. But the things that need to be done on behalf of the community don't depend on him or his death. It will bring closure, but it doesn't mean hate crimes have ended. So when I talked to her, she was still pretty upset. 2017, 6 years ago. And since then, really nothing has happened.
Well, his mom went back to China. She's passed away. So
Well,
she
yeah,
was
but
she was really angry and frustrated too. So
oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, the mom, Lily Chin, is something that Helen shared with me, that Lily Chin was the adoptive mom of Vincent Chin.
mm,
And Helen told me that she died feeling that if she hadn't adopted him, he'd be alive. It's so sad to me to think about it that way. And so this is another part of the tragedy that few people know about. Helen shared this with me a few years back. And Lily Chin, yeah, did go back, got no money, and only felt guilt that she, feels as the adoptive mom, thinking that maybe he'd still be alive.
Yeah, that's not necessarily a typical response, but it is also not an infrequent response. Survivor's guilt and all that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it just shows.
Especially for Chinese and other Asian moms,
Yeah.
they feel responsible.
Well, what Zia told me is that she was just upset that all this time had passed, and there was no there was no criminal satisfaction in terms of justice. The civil case, there has been to date no no payment on the judgment against a man, Ronald Liebens, who essentially is judgment proof. And so when I talked to Helen about 6 years ago, we just went over. You had mentioned what is Cincinnati or Michigan like now versus then. Um, we compared what it was like then versus now in terms of how the lawyers were in their willingness to even discuss the case, because apparently there was a dispute between the ACLU, the National ACU, and the ACLU of Michigan, and the National Lawyers Guild in Michigan, and the National Lawyers Guild, national office. And apparently the state folks did not believe that immigrants and Asian Americans were protected by the civil rights law.
Was this Detroit? I mean, or Michigan, or was this
Yeah,
Ohio?
this is the Michigan chapter,
And
ACLU.
that was NLG that felt that way.
Yep,
Well, I didn't know that. NLG is, at least here on the West Coast, it's a way progressive
right.
organization,
Oh,
and so.
we're talking about 82, right?
Mhm.
This is the National Lawyers Guild, NLG, Michigan chapter.
Well, but
Apparently,
I was referring student. I mean, I was referring potential clients out when I was clerking while I was in law school, and I would refer them to NLG, and they had a waiting list, of course,
mhm,
because they would do a lot of free stuff,
right.
but they took on cases that had these kinds of uh, elements of race and prejudice and violence. They took on a lot of those cases. Usually, they were doing criminal defense.
Well, that may have been the case in when you say NLG was
In San Francisco in the 70s, but yeah, when we're looking at Michigan and or Ohio in the
just
70s, yeah,
just Michigan
yeah,
is what
and that's in the early 80s, yeah.
82. She was telling me that the national offices had to whip the locals in line to even see this as an Asian American case that was defensible by civil rights law, because the idea was that race was seen in terms of black and white and not Asian, and
Yeah,
so
I think that's a really important point because
yeah,
1982, you know,
yeah,
uh, way back during the SF state strike and all that activity that was going on in the late 60s, the height of the civil rights movement, the more aggressive side of the civil rights movement. When Asian Americans got involved, we were constantly asked, what problems do you have?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
you don't have one.
it wasn't a matter of model minority. It was a matter of, hey, what are you doing here? You don't count. And this is a direct quote from Helen.
Well,
Helen,
that's accurate,
yeah,
an,
she said
an accurate appraisal.
hate crime protection laws now also include perceived gender and disability, but back then it was the Vincent Chin case when we had to argue civil rights was more than black or white. And
Yep.
And that's why it's kind of interesting to see now how now we assume, oh yeah, Vincent Chin, we would cover this case, but we have a community that is kind of, they don't understand, they don't know the Vincent Chin case.
Even if they were told, here's the follow up question. Even if they were told about the case, just as we've spent time, describing it in pretty damn good detail, particularly the elements that conflict with any sense of fair process, due process, and a justifiable result, right? So not only a conviction that lasts, but the actual punishment, fulfilling an actual sentence for prison time. So we didn't get any of that from this case, and that's really what frustrated a lot of people. The good side of that experience is that the Asian Americans started organizing on a national level and became that that generation of people, particularly the ones that were in college and that were younger workers at the time, right? People, let's say under 35, they really identified with this.
Yeah.
They
Well,
really identified with
this
this.
is the thing, and for people uh, of a certain age, I mean, people in their 50s and 60s and up, they remember 1982. They remember either they were careerists, I mean, civil rights. I mean, some people were activists,
Yeah.
but took a case like this to really light the fire. I mean, because the activism in 82 in San Francisco, if you're a Filipino, was really more around protesting Marcos,
and
protesting the
and also immigration issues.
right, Marcos
So,
dictatorship and immigration issues. And we weren't thinking about xenophobia and hate crimes, related to anti-Asian hate. And now, 41 years later, here we have. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't understand anti-Asian hate. I don't think they know what to do about it, but when they think about the Atlanta spa killings, they think about the transgressions against Asian Americans since the pandemic. They get it, I think. What do you think?
yeah, I think they're aware that Asian Americans do suffer even violent injuries, damages, and death because of racial hatred. I think they accept that now,
Yeah.
but they see it as occurring at a much more infrequent basis.
Hmm.
Okay, and some of that is because we don't report it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think as soon as those Atlanta spa killings happened, there was like a, oh my God, we have not paid attention to this. We haven't, and that was just a couple of years ago. And that murderer, Robert Aaron Long, he was convicted, and in one county he was just convicted, no hate crimes, but in Fulton County, where Fonnie Willis is the prosecutor, and she's going after Trump, she's looking for the she's looking for federal hate crimes against Robert Aaron Long, and that is a case that is still outstanding. Fonnie Willis has her hands full right now, but that case is still in the public eye, or people notice it, and I don't think it's I don't think it's ever gonna replace Vincent Chin. It might, but I mean, because when it happened a couple of years ago, people people woke up and said, "Wow, yeah, Asian Americans, they're on the wrong end of this a lot."
Yep.
So, so here's another quote from Helen that I think is worth talking about. She says, So when Vincent Chin was killed 30 years later in 1982, the communities had, I think of it as stunted growth. There weren't people running for office. If there were, it was a minuscule number. There weren't people standing up. We didn't have advocacy organizations except for ALDEF in New York and Asian Law Caucus in California, with no Pan Asian advocacy groups in between. A right to justice and a community sense of empowerment was a difficult thing to imagine for many Asian Americans. Quote, not only did we not have it, Zia said, people didn't even recognize it was something we could have. The idea we all came together with the Vincent Chin case and sang Kumbaya and took over and went to the Reagan White House and the Department of Justice and got all these things to happen, that's a mythology. And I think it's a disservice to the next generation to think this. So, as a message to the next generation, look at Vincent Chin and look at how hard it was to get what was done. And look at how today, 41 years later, the case is, it's not forgotten. We're talking about it, but it's not like everyone is talking about it like they should.
They should understand it in precisely the way that we've described it. They should feel the frustration and note the injustice, the inevitable injustice. And there were so many situations, so many points in time uh, in the whole legal and social process where is clearly unfair and clearly unjust, and that was what was really angering for me.
Yeah.
Is that what are you going to do now? And when you bring up the fact that he's judgment proof, that's the first thing that a lot of people, people who do DUIs and kill somebody,
Mm,
if they have money, the first thing they do is go out and alienate their property and stuff so that they become try to make themselves as judgment proof as possible.
yeah.
That's the first thing they do.
The legal way to
And
hide their money, to protect their money. And, this is a, this is the sad thing about the law. And then, there's nothing to do to try to, to make them pay up if they appear.
yeah, you gotta hit them immediately with a mandatory order, to hold all their assets.
Well, I mean, the
You
thing is, they haven't changed those laws. And Ebens, like I said, when I talked to him in 1980, 80, or see, 20, actually 2012 is when I talked to him.
yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I didn't know the exact year, but I knew it was in this
Yeah. It was,
past,
yeah.
this past decade.
Yeah. I didn't talk to him in 82. Other people talked to him, close to the trial. He was in all the documentaries.
Yeah, a lot. One of the things that I didn't like at the time that it happened was a lot of the Asians who were talking about the case,
Mm,
even as Evans and Nitz were up for trial, never mentioned the cold cocking. I mean, that the guy got cold cocked.
yeah. Well,
Uh,
it wasn't like there was a fight. Vincent was
yeah,
in a fight with,
yeah, but
and
the point is that he threw the first
yeah,
punch, and yeah,
yeah. It was a sucker punch. I mean, Vincent Chin was no angel, although he didn't deserve to die.
right.
And and
Well, at the time, everybody was playing the victim game, right? The more of a victim you could make him look, right? The better the movement, the formation of unity around the injustice, right?
yeah. Well, look,
Was
one of the things about the case is I didn't want to, like. It's important to go over the basic facts and understand what happened, what that time was like. But the value about talking about it now, 41 years later, about going over it each and every day, is to be more meditative about it and to also wonder, where does this leave Asian America as a community all these years later? I mean,
right.
where are we? as a community. Sometimes I think when I was talking about that North Korean defector who is denouncing the dictatorship of North Korea and then saying, "Oh, we're having the exact same thing here, this dictatorship in America."
Yeah, the Democrats and Biden,
Yeah,
right? You
I
know,
mean it's almost, and she's being used by the Republicans almost in the same way that the anti-affirmative action Asian Americans were being used by conservatives.
right,
It's
right.
kind of it's kind of the trend. So what can we learn 41 years after Vincent Chin about the Asian American community, and what can how can re remembering the Chin case help us as we try to figure out where Asian America is and where it
Well, the
has.
first thing is that the Asian Americans shouldn't have to the affirmative action program
Yeah,
because they're if they were discriminated against, that's a simple discrimination case. If you can show pattern in practice and you can prove that there were people who were eligible for admission, and you can show that there was unfairness in the way that people's quote character, traits were measured, and what kind of value was assigned to them, because that's how they were denied.
yeah,
That's what you got to aim at. But instead, they got, as you put it, used to be able to go after affirmative action in general terms.
yeah,
Okay, that's not going to help them. So that's it's, the thing that they need to learn, and that's my main point. It's really not going to help them.
yeah. Well, how about this? I mean, a lot of people are understanding that Asian Americans who were anti-affirmative action were used by the white-based anti-affirmative action group, and when you look at the numbers, you see that okay, if the Asian Americans were discriminated against, uh, whose spaces were they taking up? Were they taking up blacks or Latinx spaces? No, it was the white spaces there.
Exactly.
And so,
Exactly.
if that's the case, then what kind of alliance, or what does this do to the Asian white alliance when the whites suddenly say, "Well, thank you, Asian Americans, for ending affirmative action, but we don't need you anymore because we have to protect affirmative action for whites, and you're getting in the way of affirmative action for whites." And
Yeah.
it's like,
And the other laugher is it does nothing about legacy.
yeah, there's nothing about the legacy admissions or
Yeah.
the athletes or the
Right. Yeah.
donors or the high donors,
Yeah.
which essentially is a de facto affirmative action for whites, but it could be. But I'll tell you something about legacies. Like, when I went to Harvard and my kid applied, there was no legacy admission for my kid. I mean, my kids were not seen as, oh, this is the legacy of affirmative action. We want to let them in.
No. No way.
That was not like, oh, well, let's extend. No, but now if it was, oh,
That's because
Emil,
your dad didn't come over in the Mayflower as a
yeah, or it's because Emil didn't like back up the Brinks truck and like
Oh yeah, major donor. Yeah, that's
dump.
true. That's true at Stanford as well.
Yeah, I didn't dump a bunch of money, but if I had backed up the Brinks truck, it would have been an empty truck, and they would just have the truck. I don't know if they really need the truck. Maybe it could cart the other people's money, but
Yeah,
I
right.
didn't have any. I didn't have anything to give them. I still get. They're not dunning letters. They're more like, "Don't you want your kid to go to Harvard? Don't you want your kid? Don't you want to give now? Pay in advance." So, all right. In terms of where we are as an Asian American community, can we still learn from the Vincent Chin case?
Oh
41.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I talk about it in my class,
Yeah,
and I don't talk about it with great depth, but my main purpose in the class is to show that uh, the system is biased, and that bias is reflective of a general bias within the society, that people see only uh, vile threats and very clear threats, uh, up to and including violence, right, as indicators of real racism. They do not see having a biased mentality, right, as being racism,
Yeah.
because they just absolutely deny that they have bias.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think that I don't know what's going to happen with the Supreme Court decision. I've saved some time for these mullings on affirmative action, uh,
Right.
because at every point in June, we think, is the decision going to come out today? They released a decision, the Supreme Court, on immigration, saying that the states had no standing to block uh, President Biden and his desire to prioritize cases coming across the southern border, whereas Texas and Louisiana wanted to say, you got to go after everyone. You can't prioritize. You can't like just go after the bad guys. You got to go after all of them. And so the Supreme Court, in an 8-1 decision, backed the Biden administration. So that was good. This is a new configuration of the court, 8-1. Most people think it's just the 6-3 conservative Supreme Court, which is why a lot of people think, oh, this is why the Supreme Court is going to vote against affirmative action. But now, what do you think is going to happen, Dan, when it comes out?
I think there is a risk that it'll be entirely wiped out. There is that risk, but there's a distinction between North Carolina and Harvard, right? In the instance of North Carolina, there was lower court already said that there was no indication of discrimination.
Right.
Okay,
Same at
so
Harvard. Same at Harvard.
yeah, well,
The
yeah,
lower court, did prevail and say no discrimination.
there was no discrimination. Yeah,
Harvard was,
but I think it's on an appeal. I think that there's very clear that you could show that there was in fact discrimination. The problem is, ever since the late '80s, right? Uh, the requirement in order to show actual discrimination and win, you got to show clear evidence of discrimination. And there were a few cases that occurred in the early '90s that took 10 years to work their way through the court system. But one of them was uh, remember the tail hook scandal?
oh yeah, yeah.
Discrimination against females in the Navy.
Hmm.
And then
Well,
it took them 10 years to win that case, and the reason they won was because they came up with evidence that clearly was sexist in its bias and intent.
all right, but now, Dan, I had a question about this I wanted to pose to you. If you're discriminated against and you say, look, I'm Asian, I have all these good grades, and I've definitely qualified, I should have gotten in. Uh, but if race is just one factor, I mean, yes, an admissions office may have, quote unquote, discriminated against you as a qualified candidate, but there's got to be some legal definition of, not, I mean, you could be rejected and still be a qualified candidate. Just being qualified doesn't guarantee admission.
That's
And
right.
wouldn't that be a quote unquote legal discrimination? A legal act of discrimination
I
and not.
mean, it's a discrimination that is defensible,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, and therefore there's no result of finding of culpability. Yeah, it would be, and it happens all the time.
Yeah, I mean, there are times when someone says no to you. I mean, you might. I mean,
You
uh,
don't know what their motivation is necessarily, so you have to look at either past practice, right? And remember, I just said that as of the Ward's Cove case, '89, you had to have a smoking gun.
yeah,
You know, there was another case that came up around that same period, and it involved one of the big oil companies, and I think it was Standard Oil. And the material, by then email had been, customarily used for internal communications and all that. And so there was evidence in email where people were talking about too many jelly beans of different colors. They
Yeah.
made reference. It was really stupid because the jelly bean color thing, right? It was really so obvious a reference
Sounds like
because
sounds
they
like an
didn't talk about people. They talked about jelly beans,
it sounds
black
like an
jelly beans, and
illegal jelly bean quota.
brown jelly beans. Yeah.
Well,
You don't want too many of those yellow jelly beans.
the thing is, an admissions office is allowed to discriminate legally. You just had to do it properly. And like what Alito, who's against affirmative action, says, hey, look, affirmative action is a zero sum game.
That's it. Yeah.
And they're trying to, but how do you, but is it really, it's kind of a win-win, because you might get rejected from your elite choice, or your school, the choice of your elite school, but you're not going to get rejected from maybe your second choice or your third choice.
Well, when other minorities, particularly the ones that are seen as less, more the obvious, let's say, uh, they were the victims, okay, of racism, exclusion, class bias, all that kind of stuff. All of those kind of arguments that you can make. And in the instance of women, of course, it's misogyny and all that. So you know, when we take into consideration all of the very well used right elements of discrimination, the reality is that they came up with measures like the personality traits measures that
Right.
Harvard was using. And
Right.
and remember at Berkeley, when Asian Americans started coming in, in huge numbers, I think our total population was somewhere around 4% of the national population.
Right.
But at schools like Berkeley, particularly in California, because we got a huge Asian American population here, we were approaching 30% of the total population at Berkeley, for example.
Yeah.
And so they said, well, we're looking for leadership. We want those kind of leadership characteristics, and chess team, and that's not going to make it. But debating club,
First chair
right?
violin. First chair violin. That's leadership. First,
Well, they started looking at ROTC,
oh yeah. Well, yeah.
but it was a big mistake because in San Francisco, ROTC was really popular with
Yeah.
Filipinos and Chinese Americans, and then eventually with Vietnamese Americans and South Koreans, right? Korean American, and so a lot of them were passing that test with flying colors,
Yeah.
right?
So
So yeah,
yeah.
people
Look.
people also don't remember the Lowell cases, right?
Yeah. People.
So
Yeah. Well, look. Let's bring up the Lowell cases another time, because I they are kind of like the they're kind of like the Harvard case, a junior version of the Harvard
yeah,
case.
exactly.
But I always thought, look, it's about resources. Let's have more Harvards and more Lowells. But that's not the way it works.
Nope, nope.
You
Well,
know.
what was bad about the Lowell case? It was blacks versus Chinese.
Yeah.
It came down to the NAACP taking a position uh, that would. They said that the Chinese had to have a higher score for admissibility
Yeah.
than everybody else, and so there was a hierarchy of admissions, and whites were down in the middle somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But the Asians had to have a higher score, and the Chinese were at the highest level.
Well,
So
look, that's discriminatory, isn't it?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean,
That's what was stupid about the suggestion. And
yeah.
and the thing that pissed me off personally was that the NAACP attorney came from SF State. I knew him personally, right? he also started teaching in what is now Africana Studies, but it was Black Studies at the time. And we went to Hastings together. We were in the same class together, and I would get in arguments with him, right, at meetings about LEOP, right, Legal Education Opportunity Program, because I was a major fixture in running the student end of the admissions project, the LEOP admissions project, and so we would have conflict with the African Americans because the standard that they were using was a lot looser than our standard, and
Yeah.
uh,
Well, Dan, how about this? What do you think is going to happen when uh, when the court rules? They may not give a prescription in terms of this is how you fix it.
right,
They,
right,
they might just say, in this case in Harvard, it was wrong. Harvard has to fix it. They may, who knows? They may just leave it. They may leave Grutter, which is the law of the land in terms of affirmative action, where you can
right.
use race a little bit, but maybe make it even more narrow. I mean, they could do
Yeah,
anything.
that's it. That's where I think it would go. That's exactly where I think it would go.
They,
They
they,
would they would just say, well, there are other characteristics that should be as well measured, and then give them the opportunity, to use a combination of those other characteristics. We I was going to mention at law school, we used a an economic measure. We said you got to include what their income level is and all the rest of that, right? And because we were getting people who were applying from the wealthy neighborhoods, right? They were coming to us, and from not what's that area right next to Burlingame? It's really high end. Hillsboro.
that's pretty high end.
People coming in with Hillsboro addresses, right? Coming in from the East Bay with Danville addresses, things like that.
Danville's not
And
great, but it's no.
well, there's a really high concentration of money
Oh,
in Danville, especially at Blackhawk.
well, now, but that. I mean, maybe I started seeing black. Well, anyway, look, that's San Francisco Bay Area real estate.
That's
Well,
right.
look, Dan, I want to move on to one more topic, and then we'll say goodbye. Because I don't.
Okay.
Well, because let's. I think the Supreme Court is going to affirmative action, dump its affirmative action opinion on Thursday, which means we
Okay.
have time to talk about it next Friday. But
Okay.
I just think they're waiting. They've got it, and maybe they're going to tweak it a bit. I don't know, but I think they want to dump it just before vacation, and so we should have time to talk about what we think about the decision. Because
That's what they did with the Backy case back
yeah,
in the 70s.
we've been teased about it every week, for June, and it was going to be the last two weeks, maybe down to the last day. So, all right, look, I want to talk about one thing that happened this week, or a couple of things, a cluster of things, and that was Prime Minister Modi of India here in Washington in the U.S. Biden was in Kentfield in Marin County in San Francisco, and he said Biden called President Xi of China a dictator,
Yeah.
and you know
No, he mentioned a direct. He said that he's frustrated because you can't control everything, and that kind of attitude is really frustrating for dictators. So he used it as a general description of dictators, and
dictator.
then the media went ahead and said, "Nah, you called him a dictator."
All
Uh,
right,
yeah,
they mentioned Xi and dictator in the same sentence.
that's right.
Kind of reminded me of this whole thing. Reminded me we're Filipinos, Filipino Americans. It reminded me of Marcos and its relationship with the U.S. And no one called him dictator if you were pro Reagan or pro Bush. If you're a pro community, you called him a dictator. He was a
Yeah,
dictator.
well, particularly the hard left, right? And there were groups in the United States that were composed of recent arrivals from the Philippines
Yeah.
who had suffered
Yeah. Well,
under. under the Marcos regime.
So now we have Biden talking about Xi as in this dictator you know kind of context, and then you have him talking with Modi, who is an authoritarian, which is kind of like not exactly dictator light, but authoritarian. Definitely an authoritarian with authoritarian in his background. And here is Biden petting him with the state dinner,
Yep.
Indian stars. They have vegetarian food.
Right. Right.
Where are we going with? I mean, and
We they went a little overboard, but
on
uh,
Modi, on Modi.
yeah, on Modi, I think they went a little bit too far. But it's really important to cultivate a stronger relationship with Modi and with India because of their proximity to China and Russia.
Yeah,
So there you go, right there. And India is going to become a power in much the same way that China rose to power.
yeah,
And so, their development of a middle class is more difficult because they got a huge population and a lot of it's rural.
yeah.
And so and there's a massive poverty in the larger cities. So their development is going to be problematic. It's going to be in steps and all that, but eventually they will succeed in developing a substantial middle class.
Yeah.
Now that's already happened in China, and that's one of the reasons that Xi can't have complete control of the situation because there's a level of class consciousness. Remember when they went crazy and they built all these cities
Yeah. In China.
away from Beijing and away from the south and out into the open areas that were formerly rural, and they were trying to make these really cool suburban hubs essentially, and nobody went there. To play, so they got these beautifully constructed, abandoned cities, right?
Well,
So
here's the thing about it just makes Biden look uh, the American sense is not clear, right? Because we are on the one hand, uh, you know, we can't tell if we're friends or foe with Biden or with Modi. It's
right, right.
this is the nothing is black and white. We like the dictator today. We don't like him the next day. We like President Xi today. We don't like him the next day. And it just and look as
Well,
far
that might be the way the American public and some elements in the rest of the world see it.
yeah.
But I think it is definitely much more just simple transactional behavior.
Well, the other thing I saw an Indian person, an Indian media person, write something for the Washington Post the other day. He said, "Look, don't expect India to be your ally, United States, because India is going to play with everybody."
That's right.
And maybe that's just why we can't figure out the correct dance, because we're going to need China. We're not going to need China. We're going to need India. We're not going to need India. How about the Philippines? We're going to need the Philippines. Now we need the Philippines more, and they need us more. And now, we had a time when Duterte was talking smack to both, you know, Barack Obama and
Obama and
Trump.
Trump.
Yeah, and now we're back in the fold. I mean, Filipinos are back in the fold. So I think this is just modern.
Well, the entire goddamn the kids,
Yeah.
the Marcos kids, all of them were educated here. So at some point in their advanced education, that this is where they were.
Yeah.
Remember when they had that party group that they basically owned their own freaking private restaurant down there? I think it was called Groucho's or something like
Where
that
in Manila?
in San
Oh,
Mateo. In San Mateo.
oh no, I don't.
In San Mateo. Oh yeah,
I
man.
was
And
I
so
was never invited to Groucho's.
it was the hip place for all those folks that were connected,
Well,
to the Marcoses. And
except if you were born here, Filipino, American Filipino. which is why I always make that distinction, American Filipino, between immigrant Filipino American. Anyway, all right. So Modi, we just have to deal with the fact that it's going to be ever changing and nuanced.
Well, but the United States has what in international relations we called it pragmatist,
Yeah.
right? And that's just another way of saying transactional. you know, so that's always been a problem. And when you have a pragmatic perspective and you do things as they come, that favor whatever position you have, and also that favor predictable, right, anticipable, right, situations, then you're going to contradict
Yeah.
the
Well,
principles, and you're going to contradict diplomacy. And so that's what's going on now. The things that you've described, in fact, have
yeah.
occurred,
Well, it's
right?
not going to be all that predictable. It's going to be predictable that you're going to have some kind of strange things going on. It's going to impact Asian Americans of Indian persuasion, Chinese persuasion, Filipino persuasion, because
Sure.
I mean, the awareness of Indian Americans never as high as it was over the last couple of days. I mean, more Indians serving in Congress. We have the Indian American vice president. I mean, she's
Uh,
definitely Indian American. She's half, but you know, Biden mentioned it. Modi mentioned it. Her Indianness is, right there, and,
okay.
and I just think that that's a good thing for Indian Americans. Their profile goes up. There are 4 million of them. They are more numerous than Filipinos now, and they're vying with the Chinese, and maybe they will overtake in terms of political power Indian Americans. They're going to be beneficiaries.
Wait a minute. Who is going to
I think
take over?
Indian Americans are going to overtake Chinese Americans
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
terms
Okay,
of
that's cool.
political influence, just because of,
I think they already have.
well, in terms of money, in terms of their representation. In,
Well, what the hell? I mean, electoral politics is unfortunately in this society nothing but money.
yeah, yeah, right.
You know,
Well, I mean, I think that's why they were talking about. Well, there are more Indians in Congress now. A handful of Chinese, one Filipino American, Bobby
right?
Scott, who's half black, out of, out
Exactly.
of
Yeah.
Virginia. But this is why you got to wonder what happened to us. What happened to Filipinos?
If a high percentage, one, doesn't vote even though they're qualified to vote as citizens,
Yeah,
and two, when a high percentage vote for people like Trump, okay, that immediately shows the likelihood of failed understanding of their own political circumstance and economic circumstance. I think that's the proof of it. The other thing is the attitude that my students were upset about 40 years ago when the Democratic Party had their national convention here in San Francisco. 39 years ago. They were really ticked off because so many Filipinos said, my vote doesn't matter.
yeah.
And so you still have that now. You got people who are shooting their mouths off and being very Philippine nationalistic. The difference that you were pointing at, your American Filipino, Philippine nationalism, right? And that's people say, why did they support Marcos? For like 19 years, in the face of all of the corruption and the legacy of violence and all that, and it's because he was looking good
Yeah.
as far as they were concerned on a global
And
basis.
he,
They got to party with the best and the biggest, including the Shah of Iran.
but
That worked
also
out.
he was taken seriously by the U.S. He was backed by,
Yes, he
and
was. Yes, he was.
in that way, there was almost like a bypass between, why go to Congress or why go to Washington? We'll go through Marcos and deal with the president at the top level. And it almost, I think, for a generation or many generations of Filipino Americans, it was not seen as Washington was not for us. Manila was for us.
Right.
And that's why, I look at Manila politics, but that's a Philippines game. I'll look at Filipinos here and say, well, what's our game here? And
Well, we're 2/3 first generation.
yeah,
We're over 60% first
right, and
generation.
that
So no matter how you count, we've had several 20-year periods of first generation status, and we're that's who we are, and that those kinds of values come with the immigrants and get translated to younger generation, even American born,
right.
through the familial
So
context.
it's almost a necessity to be Filipino, but not too Filipino, because that's not where your success is going to lie, or those aren't going to be the coattails. Uh,
Well, that's a whole nother thing.
yes,
I mean, when you if you bring that up, then you got to look at how Filipinos celebrate being Filipino,
yeah,
right? And much of that is done through their hometown organizations, right?
right. Well, it's
And that's what a genuine Filipino is from their point of view.
right.
And so people like us are not genuinely Filipino.
Yeah, right. Because
They don't even accept the term American Filipino or Filipino American.
right,
They see those two terms as being mutually exclusive.
right.
You know, well, you're just talking crazy because those two things can't mutually exist in the same
Well,
person.
that's why it's good to cheer on guys like Rob Bonta, because
Absolutely.
he has managed to have success in the white world and still have some credibility in the Filipino world. In the
Yeah, but that's because he is better known among the younger generations.
right,
People 40 and under,
right,
maybe even 50 and under. Mike Gingona was one of the first, right, to get that kind of recognition here in California. There were a couple of people in Southern California. There's also a lot of hidden Filipinos with a lot of political talent, and they have been on the staffs
right, right.
of a lot of leading politicians.
Well,
And so, I mentioned Dean Graffilo every once in a while, and he was chief of staff for Bonta when he was in the assembly.
yeah, and I think that's you're right. I mean, there are people who you know it takes a lot to want to be out in front,
That's
and
right.
it's
And we have to build a culture that
yeah,
encourages people to consider that possibility.
right. It's financial. It's
Yeah,
just intellectual power or political power, but it's mostly financial, and it's also opening up personally to the kind of attack that you'll face
right.
politically.
That's
And
right.
some people, you know, are willing to stand. I mean, remember old Mario Cuomo when he wouldn't run for president.
Right.
It's because the scrutiny, and then his sons later got involved, and that didn't exactly work out. So
Right.
I just think that it takes a certain person uh, to succeed in politics, and I know for whatever reason, Filipino Americans have not risen quite to the levels where they should.
There are people who have tried, but they were ill advised in terms of how what their approach was.
Yeah. Well,
Remember one of the Osmania grandchildren, right, ran in San Mateo County as a
oh,
Republican,
oh yeah, I think I met her once.
and she was obviously intellectually competent and all the rest of that stuff, but running as a Republican in San Mateo or any of the at least five of the Bay Area counties
Yeah.
is a losing proposition.
No backing. In the meantime, appointees like Mona Pasquil has done well uh,
Sure,
using the appointment ranks.
she
Uh,
was a staffer forever. You
right,
know,
right. But she was rose to lieutenant governor. I don't think she ran though. Right.
no, she was appointed because Garamendi got elected to Congress.
That's right. So
Yeah,
I mean, but she was there. You vet her when they rise to the top. Same with Supreme Court Justice Pascal Sakauye, right?
Yeah.
She's now
Oh
retired.
yeah. She's retired. I really was. I was sad that she decided to retire, but that was one of the most significant positions attained by a Filipino in the United States.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah. I
I mean,
mentioned.
it's the head of the Supreme Court of California, and with the kind of weight that California decisions carries, and the influence that California's Supreme Court has on other states as well as the federal system.
Oh,
That's,
definitely,
that is a big deal, man.
definitely, and this is why Rob Bonta, represents so much, and I didn't want to get jump on this bandwagon where people there was a was a reporter got him to ask him a question about running for
Governor.
governor. Yeah, I don't know. It may be slightly premature, although don't know where things will fall out. You just know that coming from the AG's office and seeing where predecessors have landed,
Yeah.
governor is not too far fetched, but the musical chairs are still floating around. And to his credit, Rob Bonta is very savvy about not saying, and so I chose not to pursue the line of Rob Bonta, governor. Oh, maybe, but not yet. I mean, he wasn't. It wasn't like a. It was more like I'm thinking about it, but not a definitive. So politically, he's a good card player, Rob Bonta.
He is. He is. Yeah. Yeah, I think I can't think of any place else except senator, right? U.S. senator that would be a great place to land. I mean, remember
Well, I mean, look, vice president wouldn't be bad.
yeah, but it doesn't last forever. The most you get is 8 years,
Yeah,
and
but
then and then and then your only hope is to try and run for the main seat.
well,
But
yeah, yeah, senator. Well, that's an issue, right?
it's a
Because
problematic because there's so many people in line,
yeah, well,
and they're experienced. They've had time, right? Schiff Porter, not so much time, but
let's
what's her
get
name and Schiff, right?
Barbara
Barbara
Lee.
Lee and Schiff have had lots of experience
Yeah,
in
it's
in
going to
the
be
lower house.
well. I mean, I guess you don't want to go from AG to Congress, although you
No,
could.
that's a downshift.
It's kind of a sideways. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a
but
downshift. But
you,
but there's
you
too
got
many people in line. You got two people that are going to be, well, three actually. I like Katie Porter for the job. I would like to see a younger person go there. So
well
for me, I would prefer that it be Lee or Porter rather than Schiff.
Schiff. Well, Schiff. I don't know. I know. I'd like to see Lee, but Schiff is certainly taken down the chin the last couple of days. But it's almost symbolically. It's not.
Yeah, I don't think it hurt him. I think it helped him.
Yeah,
I think he's going to get a lot of money out of this,
yeah.
and they look utterly stupid. I mean, the Republicans look really stupid, and the only people that are going to believe what they're pulling off are the hardcore Trumpers.
Yeah.
Nobody else. The people the alienated independents and all that, they're not gonna buy what the Republicans are pushing at this point.
So
Plus Marjorie Taylor Greene and Boebert are doing what? Calling each other the B word, right? So publicly.
well, they're in grade school. So Dan, let's land this. I'm a little disappointed in the Warriors, but I mean it's a good move that they got rid of Jordan Poole, but Chris Paul, he's good for maybe a year.
Well, that's all he's got. They just signed him for a year.
Yeah, but they could re-sign him or
He's got a good relationship with
Curry.
Curry, and they want Draymond back despite his liabilities.
Yeah, well, I just think that they need. They need a big when they get
You
a
need
big
a big guy.
yeah, like they knock on my door and say, Emil, I hear you're a 7-footer available. Uh, I haven't done that yet, but so
Yeah, we hear you're only 5'6", but you got springs.
yeah, well,
You know,
no.
you can jam. You know,
So and then the Giants, the Giants, their 10-game winning streak ended, but it ended with them losing 10-0.
right.
So now for numerologists out there, that's a big deal.
Right.
10-game winning, it's never happened before. Never. 10-game winning streak.
So at the end of their 10 year, they lose 10-0, and numerologically that means that's the end of their whole season, right? I mean, it's all
Well,
going to be losing from here on out, right?
no, they're playing the Diamondbacks this week. If they sweep, they're within a half game of first place, and that would be a good way to end June. So,
Oh yeah. Well,
and
they're on their way up. If they can keep their bats as consistent as they've been, and make they got some good pitchers now.
yeah,
So
well, it's the
yeah,
young people. It's the young folks who've changed
yeah.
things around for the Giants.
And we can confuse the crap out of everybody because we got the twin Rogers brothers. So
Oh, oh yeah, the twin. Did you see the Thompson twins from Oak?
yeah. They got recruited.
Yeah, they got drafted in the
Both of
NBA.
them were in the top 10. I mean, one brother was in the top 5, and the second brother was in the top 10.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I think he was the next pick. So, boy, I didn't at the time. These are not to be confused with the new wave pop band, the Thompson Twins.
oh yeah.
They're a different Thompson Twins. All right, so Dan. All right, so
Yeah.
you have a good weekend, and
You too. You too, man.
we'll talk again next week when we figure out what.
Some more decisions come down, and we see what the situation with the Trumpsters are.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Uh,
You
I
know,
don't.
I mean, I like watching Chris Christie right now because he's really got some great barbs going,
Yeah.
man.
I.
He's a
Yeah.
lot quicker than the other guys.
Well, I think the Republicans are coming to their senses because now Will Hurd has decided he's running for president, and if you look at it, there are now like half the field are people of color, which
Yeah, that's right.
which shows a
Well,
tremendous.
well, they're sort of people of color.
Well,
They're sort of people of color. Hurd is clearly uh,
well,
less problematic, as a Republican of color.
well,
Tim Scott gets out there and says all kinds of weak crap that's
look.
really not very bright. So
The good thing about Hurd is he talks against Trump, and the more people who do that, that's good. But then you got Scott and Haley, and they're kind of like, you know, Trump suckers, and
Scott is definitely,
yeah,
but Haley's starting to come out there a little bit.
yeah, Ramaswamy definitely,
Oh, he's
yeah,
yeah,
he's going to pardon Trump, right?
yeah. He's got a brown trunk. He's got a brown tongue, dude.
Yeah. So anyway, all right, Dan.
All right,
All right,
take
so
care. Got
have
to
a,
go.
there he goes, Daniel Phil Gonzalez, College of Ethnic Studies, San Francisco State University. Let's see, I got to fix my camera here. Asian American Studies. Always good to have him on talking about stuff. That's it for our show. I mean, usually Friday when we have Dan on, we talk about more stuff. But I hope you got something out of all the things, including Vincent Chin, Day 5. Day 5, you can catch our replay on amok.com. We're here Monday through Friday on Twitter at Emil Amok, EMIL AMOK, on YouTube at Emil Amok 1, on Facebook at emilguillermo.media. And so, time to bid adieu. I like to meditate. This meta form of meditation, not meta like Facebook. Metta, METTA, like loving kindness, self-love. Show it to others, it comes back. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time. Have a good weekend.